our next guest who is going to be joining us here on the telephone. And you are live, my friend. How are you, my friend?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Pretty good, actually. Go ahead and give me a brief introduction on yourself, my friend. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Okay, my name is Patrick Schmidt. I am an attorney in Washington, D.C., focusing primarily on matters dealing with Latin America and the Caribbean. But my passion from my college days is intellectual history, and I recently wrote this book called Harvard's Quixotic Pursuit of a New Science, The Rise and Fall of the Department of Social Relations, which we'll be talking a little bit about today.
Yes, indeed.
And that is something that I started work on when I was in college and wrote my honors thesis on the same subject, and since then did a lot more research and was able to publish this book.
So, tell me a little bit about your writing process for this incredible book.
Well, as I said, the starting point was my honors thesis at Harvard, and that was based in part on a series of interviews I had done with the professors who were key players in the department's history. They were older then, but still around and were willing to be interviewed. So it was a combination of oral history with, of course, a lot of documentary research as well. And Harvard had started this department in 1946 at the end of World War II. There was a lot of activity in mid-century in the social sciences about new ways to study all sorts of things. But in the social sciences, this was a big deal because these professors thought they had come up with a new theory, a new way of studying mankind, and in their very, I won't say arrogant, but confident way, thought they could make a major contribution to mankind with their approach.
We have got a great guest with us today. Patrick L. Schmidt is with us today. Harvard's Quixotic Pursuit of a New Science, The Rise and Fall of the Department of Social Relations, and an amazing guest joins us today here on our big broadcast. So with this book, what do you want readers to take away from your writing?
Well, I think there are two things. First of all, as I mentioned, the huge sea change in mid-century in the social sciences. And this was due to two couple factors, but one of them was a huge amount of wartime research that used psychologists and sociologists and cultural anthropologists in studying things like the morale of our enemies, the morale of our own troops, very sort of mundane things like, well, how can the government sell more war bonds? So all of a sudden, these social scientists or behavioral scientists were very much in demand. Previously, no one paid them a lot of attention. Those were new disciplines. People looked at them sort of askance. But now they were the Cinderellas at the ball. They were very important all of a sudden. So that's something I think readers should take away, just this idea of how much change and ferment there was going on in academia in mid-century. And Harvard was really at the epicenter of this enthusiasm about what the social sciences could do. And then the second thing is this particular department and some of these professors, how that intersected with all sorts of social, cultural, political events in our modern American history. I mean, Timothy Leary was a professor in this department. His research and controversy about the use of psychedelic drugs really helped kick off the drug culture of the 1960s, and it was due to his research at this department. The experiment that the department faculty did on a young Ted Kaczynski as an undergraduate at Harvard, who, of course, as we know, later became the Unabomber. So there were all these other events in modern American history that sort of intersected with this one department.
We have got a great guest with us today. Patrick L. Schmidt is with us. He joins us live here on our big broadcast. In Harvard's quixotic pursuit of a new science, Patrick tells the little-known story of how some of the most renowned social scientists of the 20th century struggled to evaluate their emerging disciplines of cultural anthropology, sociology, and social and clinical psychology. Scorned and marginalized in their respective departments in the 1930s for pursuing the controversial theories of Freud and Jung, they persuaded Harvard to establish a new department promising to create an interdisciplinary science that would surpass importance of Harvard's Big Three, which were the disciplines of economics, government, and history. So, give me a little bit of the controversial theories here that they wanted to pursue.
Well, you touched on one there in that summary, and that is that in the 1920s and 30s, just as Freudian or psychoanalytic thought was arriving in the United States, some of these professors that I talk about, they were very interested in these new theories, and they wanted to incorporate them in their work. The problem was that the existing psychologists didn't want to have anything to do with this Freudian stuff. They thought it was mystic, cult-like approach, and we need to put it in the context at the time that the psychologists were then, the traditional psychologists were experimental psychologists, behavioral psychologists, and your listeners may know B.F. Skinner, who was at Harvard as a graduate student then and later become a professor. They only wanted to study things they could measure and observe and do experiments on. So they wanted nothing to do with the interior mind. What we think of now as really being psychology, like what were people's, a person's morale or their phobias or fears or, any sort of abnormalities that they might have. So there's a huge fight at Harvard about this, and these psychologists weren't speaking to one another. They were in the same department. Harvard had a real problem, and they solved it partially by creating this new department and taking the newer oriented psychologists out of it and putting them in this new department with sociologists and with cultural anthropologists who were also studying Freud and wanted to use Freud in their approaches. So that was part of it. And then second, the ringleader of the group, Talcott Parsons, the sociologist, he believed that he could create a theory that would unite all the social sciences in one theory and would be a much better way to study mankind. So he was very, some would say arrogant, some would say delusional, but that was what was really the impetus behind the creation of this department, a new way to study mankind.
We have got a great guest with us today. Joins us live here on our big broadcast, coast to coast, border to border on iHeartRadio today. Patrick L. Schmidt is with us. So you mentioned some of the controversial things, the Ted Kaczynski, Unabomber, some of these other things. Give us more details on some of those.
Well, on the Kaczynski controversy or scandal, as we now would know it, he came to Harvard in 1959. He was only 16 years old when he got accepted to Harvard. He was brilliant, but he was very socially sort of awkward. He had some issues, and there was a professor at Harvard, Henry Murray, who had been the psychologist for the Office of Strategic Services in World War II. That was a precursor to the Central Intelligence Agency. And this professor's specialty was, how do you break down spies? How do you put them under so much stress that they will break down? And at Harvard in the 50s, he continued to do this type of research, but now he was doing it on students. And one of the unfortunate students that got selected was young Ted Kaczynski. And for 3 years, they did this rather traumatic experiment on Kaczynski, and at the end of it, at the end of the 3 years, Kaczynski said it was the worst experience of his life. It's when he became disillusioned with society. And I'm not saying they created the Unabomber, but it was an unfortunate incident. And when he was apprehended in the 1990s, this all came out. So it came out after the fact, but it was still kind of a black eye for the department that this type of research was being done.
We have got a great guest with us today. Patrick L. Schmidt is with us. He joins us here on our big broadcast, talking a little bit about his brand new book, Harvard's Quixotic Pursuit of a New Science, The Rise and Fall of the Department of Social Relations. So, what are some of your goals for this book?
Well, the goal is to really kind of, shine a light on the and remind people how controversial Freud and Jung and the introduction of their theories were to American universities in the 1920s and 30s. That's one thing. The second thing would be to shine a light specifically on behavioral psychologists and how much change was going on in mid-century America in the behavioral sciences, and just how expansive their ideas were. And I use the word hubris, pride. Some people say arrogance, some people say delusional. I used that word before. And just so I think those are the two big things, and then also the curious history of this particular department and how it intersected with these different political issues, cultural issues. I mentioned the Timothy Leary episode, and also the Henry Murray episode, and so those are some of the main takeaways that I would hope that readers would have.
So, is there a follow-up or part 2 or anything coming to this?
No, I don't think so. I think I really told the story as completely as I can. I'm starting to hear a little bit about some of the graduate students from this department and getting their feedback on it, but I don't plan to write a second book on this topic. I tried to cover it as completely as I could in this book.
Fantastic. Well, the book is amazing. What's been some feedback that you've gotten on the book so far?
Well, so far it's been very positive. The graduates feel that it's a very good history of the department, and that I covered all the bases. And as graduate students, some of them, could relate to what I was saying about their experience, and in fact agreed with it. That it was very odd to be a graduate student in this new department when the rest of the world and all the other universities were still organized in the traditional way. I mean, there was still a separate psychology department, a sociology department, anthropology department. Harvard tried to combine all of these, and it created problems for them in the sense of the job market, because when they would graduate from Harvard, they had to go out and they were being hired as a psychologist, not as a social relationist. So they had to sort of explain, well, I really am a psychologist, even though I have this degree which says something else, social relations. So there's some back and forth on that, but essentially we're in agreement that I pinpointed that as a difficulty of this department.
We have got a great guest with us today. He joins us live here on our big broadcast. Well, before we let you go, how do people communicate with you online, through social media, if they've picked up the book or are planning on picking up the book?
Well, the book is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and indiebound.org. My author website is Schmidt, author,